I think there's a lot of uncertainty, not just within the education sector, but also in the wider kind of Australian community. And so I think there's just general societal unease around AI. So I think if we don't act soon, we'll be left behind.
I would say that schools at the moment are wrestling with that, what their position is with AI and the kinds of tools that schools have access to. I've heard you say this quote of policing AI versus the possibilities of AI.
Our role as teachers, again, is not to police and control, but it's to open the minds of our students. And part of opening the minds for them now is to accept that AI is here and we need to help them engage thoughtfully with it. The AI is here to help us. Of course, it could tutor and teach and those kind of things, but we will always value human teachers working with human students.
I'm Danny. If you like this episode, like and subscribe.
Alrighty, everybody. So today we're in the classroom with Professor Danny Liu. Danny, a big welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me here.
Danny, why don't we kick off with your journey into education and what you were like as a student and how you've come to be around AI?
It's a good question. What I was like as a student, I was one of the worst students, I think. I remember sitting in a second-year microbiology lecture, and I didn't like the lecturer. He wasn't very good. His slides were all really bad, and I just talked to my friends, got in trouble, and at that moment, I decided I'm going to become a lecturer so I can do better. So that's kind of how I got into it. So I wanted to kind of change things from the inside. And so after my PhD, which I did in molecular biology, which I got massively depressed during and just said research isn't for me. And so I went into teaching in higher education instead and kind of never left.
Wow. So, Danny, your work with AI at the moment, how would you describe this current moment of AI that Australia is in right now?
The current moment, I think, is one of, I don't know, there's many different ways and metaphors to describe it. What one is, it's a massive fire hose, and every single week a new fire hose gets turned on and no other fire hose gets turned off. And so you're just kind of constantly bombarded and pressurized with this kind of massive change that's happening. And so it's really bewildering to keep up with. I think there's a lot of uncertainty to do with that, not just in terms of what do we do in the classroom, what do we do in schools and universities, but also what does this mean for the future of education and kids and jobs and all those kinds of things. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, not just within the education sector, but also in the wider kind of Australian community. There was a recent research out, I think from University of Melbourne, which said that Aussies are the lowest users of AI in the world. Second or lowest only to New Zealand compared to a lot of other countries. And so I think there's just general societal unease around AI.
What about pacing and scale in comparison to other countries? How do you say we fare as a nation in terms of that?
I think the research is saying that Aussies are more tentative and unsure and untrusting of the technology compared to other countries. The research, I think, is saying that the countries which have lower socioeconomic statuses perhaps are more embracing of AI, possibly because they see the benefit of it more than we do. It's possible that, Australia is too comfortable and we don't see the necessity of AI yet until it really hits us. But all the work coming from around the world is saying that there's going to be job displacement, societal impacts and everything. And so I think if we don't act soon, we're going to be left behind.
I would say that schools at the moment are wrestling with that at many different levels of access and in terms of what their position is with AI and the kinds of tools that schools have access to. And so I've heard you often say this quote about, policing AI versus the possibilities of AI. And so can you unpack that for me in terms of what does policing AI look like? And how does that contrast with the possibilities that AI can offer?
It's an interesting, I like alliteration, which is why I had the P2P thing, policing to possibilities. The first reaction, I think, in education that came out in November 2022 was, what is this thing that can do my homework now? And so the first reaction when you're scared as a human being is to stop something from happening. And so it was a very natural, understandable reaction from many teachers around the world to say, we have to stop, block, detect, deny, restrict, police the use of this thing. But I think what has happened over the intervening few years is that we've realized that we can't do any of those things. We can't detect it. Detectors aren't reliable. We can't restrict it because students have their phones. They have the things at home. Even if we say on the school network, you can only use this, there's no way. You can't stop them really at home. So there's kind of the idea that the reality is we can't police it. And also as teachers, we don't really want to be in the policing role anyway, because we are educators, we're not police. We want to make sure students learn. And so how do we make sure that they learn? It's by supporting them, scaffolding them, and helping them think through the challenges, the risks, but also the opportunities that are provided by these new tools. Hence kind of the shift from that policing mentality, but we don't really want to be anywhere as teachers, into a mentality of let's explore with students and with each other what is now possible with it.
I've heard you also talk about this language of control versus language of agency. And so riffing on that policing and possibilities contrast, can you also speak to what the language of control looks like in a classroom, and what does the language of agency look like?
So I was having a chat with a couple of English, not like people from Britain, but people who teach into English. And they were saying that, I was asking them, a lot of colleagues in kind of the arts area at many universities, they have a visceral reaction against AI. And it's fair enough, because they see it as an affront to their art and their science. And so I was asking them, what does it mean when a colleague, potentially in English or in writing studies or whatever, says to a student, in my classroom, you can't use AI. And then I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, it's actually taking agency away from the student. If the teacher uses that kind of control language and says, I have decided for you that in my classroom, you cannot use AI, that is taking the agency and autonomy away from the student to make the choice for themselves. And so the perspective was, instead of doing that, it might be more useful to say, okay, well, as an educator, I'm going to understand, maybe through gritted teeth, what this thing is, so that I can present that kind of balanced perspective to my students, so that they can then have the agency to make that choice for themselves. And I quite like that kind of reframing of it to say, well, it's not so much our role as teachers, again, it's not to police and control, but it's to open the minds of our students. And part of opening the minds for them now is to accept that AI is here, and we need to help them engage thoughtfully with it.
I remember hearing you say on a podcast this analogy about the pink elephant. It's like saying, don't think about the pink elephant. And the first thing I thought of was the pink elephant. Right. So I love that whole comment about reframing. And I think part of your work as well, I've heard you say that we need to rethink the learning outcomes with that. So can you also elaborate on what does rethinking learning outcomes look like in this age of AI?
So backtrack 2.5 years, when it's kind of like you have the BC period before ChatGPT. BC, well, actually just right after it came around, the main question on educators' minds, I think, was how. How do we assess now? How do we teach now that there's this foreign thing inside the classroom? How do we make sure the students know what they're doing, not kind of cheating their way through their learning? I think it's been interesting to see that the conversation in the last, 6 to 12 months, I feel, has moved more towards the what. What do we teach? What do students need to learn? Towards that kind of thinking about, well, okay, AI is here. We do need to think about the how we teach and assess, but moreover, we need to start thinking about what is still important to learn as a student. So I think that starts to kind of lend itself to the reconsideration of learning outcomes. Because learning outcomes are fundamentally, what do we need students to walk away with? And so if there are AIs which can do these things, what do we still value that humans will do? And we, of course, will always value certain things that humans will do, even as AI gets better and better and can start to do those things. So I think the rethinking of learning outcomes is around that kind of discovery of or rediscovery of what it is that is still important to learn. When calculators came around, it's often analogy that is used, we were able to do more complex maths in year 11 and 12 because the calculators did some of the legwork for us. And so the question now is, well, with AI here to do possibly some of the legwork, what do we need students to still learn? in a K-12 context, of course, we still need students to learn foundational skills. I teach my 8.5-year-old twins. I take them through English questions and maths questions, that kind of stuff, and I sit there looking at how they struggle, and I'm like, my goodness, ChatGPT could answer this in 3 seconds. Why can't you get it? And I think, well, it's not about that. It's of course they need to get it themselves without the support of AI, because they need to develop those foundational skills. But once they develop them, are there things that are more important for them to learn now that AI is here as well? Yeah.
I'm surprised you haven't created an agent for them to.
Oh, I have. I have created agents for them.
I love that. Danny, I was going to ask you about. There's just so many things to ask you about that our conversation is triggering at the moment. But firstly, in terms of rethinking assessment and with AI, and at the University of Sydney as well, you've done a lot of work in that space around two-lane assessment and what that looks like. So can you unpack for our listeners what you've done and what you're seeing come through?
Yep. So around July 2023, I was having a chat with one of the learning designers in the Faculty of Medicine and Health, Catriona Vo, and we were having a chat about, we need some way to move educators forward, but a way that we can move them forward so that they don't have to keep changing what they do every 6 months as AI gets better and better. Educators just need direction because it's bewildering and uncertain, like we said before. And so we thought at that time, okay, well, this direction is needed. So I went away and thought, well, AI is not going to get worse, right? And we're not going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. And so we're going to need to have an acceptance of AI's use in learning and in assessment. At the same time, we as education institutions, we still need to confirm that the person walking across the graduation stage in year 12 or in after third year uni knows what they know. They have the capabilities we say that they do. And so it got me thinking that, well, the way that we do this is basically by saying that we're going to have those assessments which can confirm capability, and we're going to have all the other assessments which are going to be unobserved, where you can't actually be sure if it's a student doing it. Doesn't mean they're unimportant assessments anymore. It just means that there are assessments that you can't rely on to do the confirmation. And so that's where the two-lane thing came from. You have the confirmation lane, which is lane 1, and then you have the other lane, which is lane 2. And saying it that way kind of makes me feel that lane 2 is kind of the leftovers, but it's really not. Lane 1 is important, but lane 2 is also equally important, because that's where presumably the learning and the excitement and the motivation and the engagement happens, because it's where students can say, well, I can do this project now with the support of AI, and my teachers are going to help me think about how I can use AI helpfully in order to support my learning in this project. I need to learn because I still have this confirmation assessment coming up where whatever I learn here will need to be shown and demonstrated here, but I'll have kind of both so that I can get motivated and I can learn, I can develop my AI skills, where I can develop my disciplinary expertise, and then I can also confirm that me and my peers have walked away with some knowledge kind of thing. So that's kind of where two-lane comes from.
Yeah. And I know that you've also done some work in the menu approach, and I can see how the menu approach would feed into to both lanes, especially for lane 2 as well. And so can you speak to, obviously you went on a Disney cruise experience, and that buffet opened up many ideas there with the menu approach in terms of assessing and using AI. So can you speak into that for what you realized when you were on the cruise and how that has translated now into a menu approach for assessment?
I don't know what the word is. A word that describes how after months after the cruise, you still feel seasick. There's a special German word for that or something. But I think it was during one of those seasick moments on the cruise, like a terribly motion sick, that I thought, well, what we're basically what's happening to us on the cruise, apart from being sick, is every night we're going to a different restaurant. So we were on a 6-night cruise, I think, and every night they take you to a different themed restaurant, and it's bewildering, right? Like it's just lights and sounds and food and that kind of stuff. And what you have during the cruise is you have a serving team that follows you around, and they get to know you as a family. And so our main head waiter, he basically met us at the door every night. He showed us to our table as a family, and he showed us the menu. And the menu was bewildering. I don't go to fancy restaurants, and so I don't just order the burger or whatever, But there's like 50 items of the menu. I'm like, where do I start? And so his role as the person looking after us was to say, okay, well, I know that you don't like coriander and you prefer beef and, you're allergic to this and that and that. So I recommend this menu item, this menu item, this menu item. So what he did is he interpreted the complex milieu of the menu to recommendations that would be healthy and beneficial for us to consume every single time we sat at a different restaurant. And so I got thinking, what we're seeing with AI is similar, that there is this complex milieu of applications of AI in learning and assessment that students are faced with. And they don't know where to start, just like we don't know where to start when we sit down at the table. And our role as educators is kind of like that head waiter to say, well, we understand the menu, we understand you, we understand what you need, and so we're going to help you connect those dots. And as educators, our role is to kind of say, we understand the assessment or the learning task. We understand you as students because we've been working with you in class. We understand, hopefully, as we get familiar with it, we understand AI and what it's doing. And so let's, as educators, help you connect those dots. We'll say, for this particular assignment or this particular learning task, we know that, menu items 5, 7, and 11 are most healthy for you. Healthy choices for you. And for another assessment task or learning task, maybe items 1, 15, and 25 are the choices that you should make. And the point there is not to say educators are trying to control the students, just like our waiter wasn't controlling us, right? He was recommending the healthy options. We could have said, and we did on occasion, say we want 5 desserts. We felt terrible afterwards, right? And students can say the same thing. Students can say, I'm not going to listen to you as a teacher. I'm going to use AI for everything. And if they do, then sure, they're going to submit an assignment. It's probably going to look okay. It might get full marks or whatever, but they're not going to learn a thing. It's an unhealthy choice for them. And then when they come over to that lane 1 assessment, they're going to be found out. Their lack of learning is going to be found out not through a detection of cheating, but through a detection of learning. Yeah.
Right.
So what? And Kath Ellis from Western Sydney is really, she says that a lot. It's that kind of, our role as educators is to guide, and is to detect learning, not to detect cheating. And the menu approach, I think, is a different reframing that helps educators to say, well, that metaphor emphasizes that it's not about control, it's about guidance, and it's about healthy choices.
I love that. And I think as you were speaking, I was trying to think about the menu approach in my own classroom, but then I became overwhelmed with the amount of AI tools that are out there that can support different phases of learning, especially when you think about brainstorming, creating slides, creating, different materials. And so for educators in the classroom right now, can you give a little snapshot as to how you've seen teachers, whether that's at university or teachers in K-12 settings, engage with the menu approach using AI tools?
So it's different for every teacher, I think, and different depending on their familiarity with the tools, their discipline, and the fit of the tools into the discipline. So I'll give you an example from, I guess, my own and my colleagues who teach into education as well. So we teach essentially in-service teachers and kind of upskill them in how they use technology. And so what we try and do, for example, is, we say to teachers, navigating the academic literature is unfamiliar for you, possibly, because you may have been in the classroom for a while, know your discipline, and so you don't know how to actually navigate the literature. And one of your assignment is to do a literature review or annotated bibliography. And so what we say to them is, in class, we will show you menu item, 9 or whatever. And menu item number 9 is basically how to use site.ai or something else, in order to find key readings in the literature. And we will show them in class kind of how the site works as an AI tool. We'll take them through, we'll show them, this is site doing your assignment, basically. We hope you don't do this. It's an unhealthy choice, but this is how you would use site to, find the literature to read, quickly be able to skim through it, but then pick the ones you're going to do a deep dive on. Okay, and then we'll show you these other tools which can help you, provide some feedback on your writing or prepare for your presentation or those kind of things. And so I think it's about that kind of trying to match the activity that you're trying to do with some of the key tools that are out there that might actually support healthy learning. Not easy, because like you said, teachers are overwhelmed. There's millions of tools out there and tens of thousands coming out every week, and it's really hard to keep up. Often it can just be a matter of, sharing with colleagues. I think that kind of in school or between school sharing is really important to try and get different ideas of how different teachers are using it, but also just trying things out on a select group of tools, because you don't always need to use the brand new tool that does X, Y, Z. Often the existing tools that we have, like Claude or ChatGPT, they can do a tons already just with the right question that you ask.
How are you using those tools at the moment at the University of Sydney with your own students in terms of, I know that you've designed a platform called Cogniti, and my question to you is, how have you created these new spaces for students to be engaging with AI as well on that day-to-day basis?
I think one of the things that you need in order to create that space for students to play is you need to have safety. They need to feel safe to do this, and part of that is the 2-lane. To basically say to students, in lane 2, you're free to play. We're not going to detect the use of AI. We're not going to restrict the use of AI. We're going to guide you as teachers, because that's what we do. We guide, but we're not going to control. We're going to give you agency. And for them to realize that, wow, for these assignments, I can choose and I have agency and autonomy to choose the healthy choices or to make unhealthy choices. That gives them a lot of safety and freedom. I think that's really key. If you don't have that, then students will be like, oh, am I allowed to do this? I don't know. And the stories we're hearing from universities and schools across the world is like just students just are really scared to use it. And so if your rules don't basically ban the banning of AI, then you're going to have fear and you're not going to have safe experimentation. So I think that's the first thing to do. In terms of then how to actually engage students in this, I think it's around, a bit of teacher modeling around, this is how I use it to prepare for the class, this is why I use it, and have the teachers do like a think aloud for their students to say, well, this is how I prompted it, or these are the tools I used. This is the reason I used it in this way, because I care about you, those kind of things. So I think, it's really about allowing the safe space that people feel that they can do it without getting busted, and also then just modeling this for others.
And it's about the language as well, like
Yes.
just hearing the way in which you're framing that. It gives, if I was a student, I would have the full confidence to know what kind of choices that I was making and the agency that I have within that. Danny, we're talking just now about tech and the amount of AI tools that are out there and how overwhelming that is. And I think when we think about AI, we just tend to focus on what is the next tech tool that we can just jump onto.
Yep.
And I've noticed that you've done a lot of reflection in this space about the role of tech, but also the role, the foundational role of human relationships within that. And so can you comment on what you're realizing about tech and the role of human relationships?
So you're referring to the Maslow thing?
I am.
Yes, okay.
I sure am.
So this was I don't know how I thought about this. I was in Hong Kong speaking to a ex-teacher who now goes around the world helping other teachers think about AI, Jennifer. And I was speaking to Jennifer, and we were reflecting how we both have very similar worldviews and philosophies around what education is. And foundationally, it's about the relationship between teachers and students. And then it got me thinking that, well, I think we're at a tech conference, and so and it got me thinking that I think what we get so caught up on as educators in whatever sector is we get caught up on the latest thing, and the kind of the either the pedagogically or the administratively necessary things that we need to do. Like we need to learn an LMS, we need to learn a new tool, we need to learn direct instruction, we need to learn active learning, we need to learn all these things, and all those things are good things. I'm not saying anything about bad. I think they're all good and useful things, but they're at the top of that kind of pyramid. Tech, I put at the very top as this kind of tiny little triangle at the top. And then I say, well, tech kind of builds on different kinds of pedagogies, so active learning and direct instruction, those kind of things, differentiated learning. And tech is in service of those pedagogies. And you need to have the right pedagogy, otherwise you're going to have the wrong tech. Or the wrong use of the technology. And then I thought, well, actually underpinning those pedagogies is the science of learning. That, memory plays a role, attention plays a role, and Jason Lodge at UQ, does a lot of work in this, really great work. And underpinnings of that pedagogy is those kind of how the brain works, how learning actually works, how do we actually grow as human beings. And then I thought, well, actually, underneath even that, there's an even more foundational layer, which is relationships, mattering, motivation. It's a kind of, why are we even doing this in the first place? Why would students turn up to class every day and work with us? They sometimes don't, they sometimes do. How do we actually make sure that all those layers on top are in service of and cognizant of that foundational layer of motivation and mattering? I think it's, if students feel in the classroom that no one cares about them, then they won't feel mattering. And then anything you do on top of that won't help. If students don't feel like they matter, if you use the latest AI tool, it won't work. If students don't feel like they matter and you use active learning, it won't work because you haven't addressed that foundational need of students.
You're just blowing my mind right now with that theory. I feel like somebody needs to do a PhD on that. Danny, you also talk about in one of your white papers, you released something called the craft framework. Can you speak a bit into that, about how that framework was written, but also what implications that might have for teachers in a school setting?
School setting, that's a good one. So Simon Bates, who's one of the vice provosts at University of British Columbia, I'm actually meeting him for lunch later on. He's in Sydney this week. He and I were working with the Association of Pacific Rim Universities last year. We were going around and talking to a lot of people in the higher education space around the Pacific Rim. And when we were talking to people and doing our desk research around how universities and individuals within universities were engaging with AI, we found that kind of 5 common elements kept coming up. And they were the crafts, the CRAFT, which stands for culture, rules, access, familiarity, and trust. And we saw that in whatever conversation we had with other individuals or institutions, we could put things they were doing or things they were thinking about or deciding into one of those 5 categories, basically. And institutions had to kind of have a good combination of all 5. They couldn't be missing one, otherwise the whole thing would fall down. They had to have all 5 in order to have good engagement, positive engagement with AI. And so that's kind of how it came about. And so in the K-12 space, I introduced craft. I think, what was my first school I introduced craft to? It's a school here in North Sydney. And we were talking about how, culture, rules, access, familiarity, and trust also apply quite strongly in the K-12 kind of space, because rules, like we were saying before, if students are confused because the right rules aren't there, then they're going to be scared of this thing. Or if teachers don't know what they can do, they're going to be also scared, or just do it anyway, not tell anyone, right? That's not what. If schools don't provide access to these tools, then we're going to have the rich students being able to afford it and the less rich students not being able to, and that's not equitable. If you don't have the right familiarity, which is, like awareness and skill around the AI, you also have just students using it in bad ways or not very useful ways, and teachers doing the same thing. And then finally, the kind of trust and culture pieces around, well, if we have, for example, policing approaches used in schools, that's going to erode trust between teachers and students. If we're going to have AI vendors selling your data or using it to train AI models, that's going to erode trust between us as people and the AI. If we have this kind of fear around AI, that's going to erode the culture that we have around it. And if you don't have the right culture around it of experimentation and safety, then that's going to destroy all the other parts as well. So all 5 of those elements kind of fit together quite nicely, and it applies to K-12 as well.
Can I just zoom in on familiarity? Because that is possibly one of the biggest struggles for teachers as well in terms of upskilling in AI. Like, it took me a while to understand how even ChatGPT works and how to create an agent around that for my own needs. And now you have many similar products that are coming out there. So what advice do you have for teachers when they want to upskill in AI? What might that look like?
It's not easy because teachers are so overworked, so overloaded with work. And this is just yet another thing that people need to kind of deal with and look at. So I would say talk to your students. If the right rules are in place at your school to allow this kind of safe exploration, and hopefully it will become more and more so in different schools. If you have more safe exploration, talk to your students about how they're using it, and talk to them how you're using it in your particular discipline. It might only take a couple of minutes, looking over a student's shoulder while they're using a laptop or something. Get them to explain to you what they're doing with it and pick up some ideas. Talk to colleagues. I think that's really helpful as well. So 5 minutes in the staff room, have a chat with your colleagues and share some things around it. I think school PD days are really good to leverage for this as well. I know some schools are going all in, and they're having half-day PDs on AI basically, and bringing people in to talk about it. So I think that's also quite valuable. But I think just apart from that, it's really just diving in and playing. The best way that we all learned how to use the internet was to not read a book, to just use it, make mistakes. Sometimes we click on a phishing link and go, oh no, but sometimes we don't. And you learn how to use it by actually just trial and error and doing it yourself. So one thing that's really great about educators is that we're all great communicators. We are really good at explaining things to people so that it helps them to understand. And AI is kind of weirdly pseudo-human in that sense, that it's waiting there for us to tell it stuff. And so as an educator, we can often just think about, if I had a casual teacher in my classroom, if I was a student teacher in my classroom, even if I had a really high-performing student, what would I tell that student? Or what would I tell that teaching assistant to do in a way that would help them understand what I want out of them? And if I can phrase what I want out of that person, I could probably just do that same phrasing and use it for the AI, and it could probably do what I need to do. So a bit of play there is really good.
Oh, Danny, I wish I had a whole hour that I could pick your brain about. But just quickly, can you just give me a lowdown about Danny's brain and all the different AI tools that you're using at the moment that you're encountering that you find valuable, but that also educators have found valuable? So for example, like in the research space, I know that Cite's a very big one. Storm by Stanford as well. They've also come through. Like, can you give teachers some other tools other than ChatGPT and Copilot that might be helpful?
I strangely enough, I don't explore a huge amount of tools, because I find that the tools that I currently use are already pretty good.
Yeah.
So the basic ones like Copilot, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, they've got a lot of functionalities with them. If you know how to use them well, that's kind of where I said 90% of my use goes to those kind of tools, just those mass market tools. Notebook LM is another favorite of mine. Not because it makes podcasts, but because you're able to put in a lot of documents. It's able to help you search through your documents quite straightforwardly and kind of summarize things quite well there. Obviously, we use a lot of Cogniti at Sydney University and other schools as well, because it's a place where educators can go to build their own AIs in a very easy, kind of educator-friendly fashion. So we find that a lot of educators, they want students to use AI, but students can get a bit confused about what they should be using AI for, and we don't want to be giving them prompting lessons, right? But what the educators can do is they can build these custom AIs in Cogniti or in ChatGPT or in Gemini, and many other tools do this. And by building these custom AIs, we can basically build a bespoke AI, which then students can interact with to help them in a specific task. And so that's quite useful as well. So yeah, the mass market tools are quite good. Notebook LM is quite good. Cogniti and those kind of things where you build your own custom AIs is good. I use HeyGen sometimes for video. But yeah, I don't go too widely. Yeah.
Just a quick question on that in terms of the functionality between ChatGPT and like Claude, Gemini, Perplexity. Like, to me, it just seems like ChatGPT but different. So can you explain to me what other functionality do those other three have that ChatGPT might not have? Or is it a difference in the processing, or can teachers just be sticking to one or the other, or how do you see that playing out?
I would say if your school provides you with one of these frontier AI tools, then just stick with that one because it's going to be safe. It's going to be protected. I think that's the rule, I guess. I don't find a huge amount of difference between them. I personally prefer Claude for things like writing and maybe a bit of coding. I prefer ChatGPT for things like troubleshooting. And the speech is quite good there as well. So if I'm walking up the hill, I'll just talk ChatGPT and get things out of my head. So yeah, different, but they're similar in terms of their performance and functions.
Yeah. Well, Danny, I'm learning so much. To close, Danny, what message do you have for educators working within schools on a daily basis and thinking through AI, what message would you like to leave with teachers?
We will always value human relationships in education. One kind of additional reframing that I usually encourage people to think about is often people say this is a uniquely human trait or uniquely human skill, or this AI could never do this. I think the danger in saying something is uniquely human or AI could never X is that what if AI does be able to, well, what if AI eventually can be developed to do X? Then what do we say? Do we say, oh, no, what do we do now as humans? I think that is diminishing us as people. A way that I like to reframe it now is think about not to say AI can't do X. It's more that we will always value humans doing X. And I think we will always value humans doing education. And we will always value that kind of relationship that teachers can build with their students in the classroom, outside the classroom, between classrooms. And I think that is something we need to embrace as educators, and something we need to say, okay, now that AI is here, how can we be even better educators? That AI is here to help us. Not because it can never do. Of course, it could tutor and teach and those kind of things. But we will always value human teachers working with human students.
Danny, what a beautiful message. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast and
Thanks
for
for having me.
sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks, Kat.